Nobody prepares you for the specific kind of grief that has no funeral. No one dies. No one betrays you. No one does anything wrong. But one morning you wake up, and the people who once felt like oxygen feel like a room you've already left. And the strangest part? You're the one who feels guilty about it. Not them. You. Think about that for a second. You worked on yourself. You chose discomfort over denial. You decided to stop sleepwalking through your own life. And somehow, that is what keeps you up at night. If you've ever felt guilty for growing, this is for you. Because nobody talks about what happens after the growth. After the clarity. After you finally become someone you actually respect. What happens to the people who knew the version of you before all of that? Here's how it usually begins. It doesn't start with a fight. It starts with a pause. A pause mid-conversation where you realize you have nothing to say. Not because you're bored of the person, but because you've already solved the problem they're still living inside of. You've already asked the question they're still avoiding. You've already walked through the door they haven't opened yet. And in that pause, something shifts quietly underneath everything. You start noticing things you used to ignore. The way certain conversations circle back to the same complaints, year after year. The way your excitement about something new gets met with a joke, a redirect, a polite change of subject. The way you start editing yourself before you even open your mouth. Not because anyone asked you to. But because somewhere, at some point, you learned that growing too loud makes people uncomfortable. So you shrink. You call it humility. You call it loyalty. You call it being a good friend. But what you're really doing is apologizing for evolving. Here's the uncomfortable psychology behind this: humans are deeply tribal. For most of human history, belonging to a group wasn't just comforting. It was survival. Being cast out meant exposure, danger, death in some cases. So when growth begins to create distance, your nervous system doesn't read that as progress. It reads it as threat. It fires off the same alarm that kept your ancestors alive. You're losing the group. Pull back. Shrink. Fit in. And that alarm is convincing. It disguises itself as guilt. It whispers things like, "Who do you think you are?" and "You're leaving people behind," and "Maybe you're just becoming arrogant." But guilt and instinct are not the same thing. One protects you from doing actual harm. The other just protects you from change. The question is, which one are you actually listening to right now? Because if you've been feeling this, if you've been quietly grieving friendships that haven't technically ended, if you've been wondering whether your growth is actually worth the distance it's creating, then you need to hear what comes next. Because it's going to explain something you've been feeling for a long time, but have never had the words for. There's a specific moment most people never talk about. It's not the moment you realize you've changed. It's the moment you realize the people around you haven't. And you don't feel superior. You don't feel proud. You feel something far more complicated than that. You feel like a stranger wearing a familiar face. You show up to the same gatherings. You laugh at the right moments. You say the right things. But somewhere behind all of it, there's a quiet voice asking, "How long can I keep doing this?" And that question, once it appears, never fully goes away. Here's what the personal development world gets completely wrong. They sell growth like it's a destination. Like one day you arrive somewhere bright and everything clicks into place. New you. Better life. Upgraded circle. Clean transition. But real growth doesn't work like a movie montage. Real growth is slower. Messier. It doesn't announce itself. It just quietly rearranges what you can and cannot tolerate. What conversations feed you and which ones slowly drain something you can't quite name. And one day you're sitting across from someone you've known for years, someone who genuinely cares about you, and you realize the connection isn't gone. It's just become a different shape. One that no longer fits where you're standing. That's not a betrayal. But it feels like one. And that confusion is where the guilt lives. So let's talk about what guilt is actually doing here. Because guilt isn't random. It has a job. When you hurt someone, guilt pushes you to repair it. That's healthy. That's guilt functioning correctly. But there's another kind of guilt. A counterfeit version. One that shows up not when you've done something wrong, but when you've done something different. This guilt doesn't protect anyone. It just keeps you small enough to feel safe inside old spaces. It shows up every time you want to share something you're proud of, then stop yourself. Every time you start to create distance, then overcompensate with texts and check-ins you don't fully mean. Every time you feel relieved after canceling plans, and then immediately feel terrible about feeling relieved. You know that feeling? That specific cocktail of relief and shame? That's not a character flaw. That's what happens when your inner world has outpaced your outer world, and you haven't yet given yourself permission to acknowledge it. And here's where it gets psychologically interesting. The people around you can feel the shift. Even when nothing is said. Even when you're performing normalcy perfectly. Humans are extraordinarily sensitive to authenticity. We don't always have words for what we're sensing, but we sense it. The energy changes. The laughs feel slightly rehearsed. The silences carry more weight than they used to. And sometimes, the people who feel that shift respond with their own version of guilt. They pull away. They get quieter. They become harder to reach. And you interpret that as confirmation. See? I'm losing them. But what's actually happening is two people feeling the same gap from opposite sides, and neither one knowing how to talk about it. Because there are no words yet for a loss that hasn't officially happened. This is why outgrowing others feels heavier than most breakups. A breakup has language. It has a timeline. It has closure, even when the closure is painful. But this slow drift between people who still technically care about each other? There's no script for it. No ritual. No acknowledged ending. Just a gradually widening space that both people pretend isn't there until one day it simply becomes the truth. And the guilt of that, the guilt of being the one who changed, the one whose inner world shifted and pulled the foundation loose without meaning to, that guilt can follow you for years if you let it. But here's what I want you to sit with before we go further. What if the guilt isn't telling you that you did something wrong? What if it's just telling you that you cared? Because cold people don't feel this. People who never invested, never connected, never actually showed up, they don't lose sleep over growing apart. You do. Because it meant something. Because they meant something. And meaning doesn't disappear just because direction does. Here's the part nobody tells you. The guilt doesn't leave when you make peace with the distance. It just stops having power over your decisions. And that shift, quiet as it is, changes everything. Because there's a difference between carrying guilt and being controlled by it. One means you're human. The other means you're stuck. And you've been stuck long enough trying to hold together something that was already becoming something else. So what do you actually do with this? You stop trying to shrink the gap by shrinking yourself. Because here's what most people discover the hard way. When you abandon your growth to protect someone else's comfort, you don't save the connection. You just slowly build resentment inside it. And resentment is just love that ran out of room to breathe. You start showing up quieter. Giving less. Withdrawing in ways you can't even fully explain to yourself. Not because you stopped caring, but because you started suffocating inside a version of yourself you've already moved past. And that version of staying isn't loyalty. It's slow disappearance. And disappearing quietly is still leaving. It just hurts longer. Real loyalty to the people you love looks different than most people think. It doesn't mean matching their pace. It doesn't mean pretending you haven't changed. It means being honest enough to let the relationship become whatever it actually is now, instead of forcing it to remain what it used to be. Some connections will genuinely surprise you. Given room to breathe, they evolve. The dynamic shifts into something quieter, less frequent, but somehow more real. More honest. Built on who you both actually are now, instead of who you were to each other years ago. Others will fade completely. And you will grieve that. Fully, and without a clean ending to point to. But fading is not failure. Sometimes two people simply grow in directions that stop overlapping. And both can walk away having meant something completely real to each other. That's not a tragedy. That's just life being honest with you before you are honest with yourself. What you're really afraid of, underneath all the guilt, is this. That growing means ending up alone. That the further you go, the fewer people will truly understand you. That evolution is just a slow, sophisticated form of isolation dressed up as progress. But that fear has it completely backwards. The connections you're mourning right now, the ones built around an older version of you, they were never going to survive your becoming. Not because they were wrong, but because you've changed at a depth that now requires a different kind of witness. Someone who meets you where you actually are, not where you used to be comfortable. And those people exist. They're just not standing where you used to stand. So if you're carrying this guilt today, let it mean something without letting it decide something. Let it remind you that you loved those people genuinely. That you didn't drift carelessly. That your empathy never switched off even when your direction changed completely. But don't let it drag you back into a version of yourself you've already lived through and grown beyond. You didn't outgrow those people to hurt them. You outgrew them because you finally stopped hurting yourself. And that, quietly, without applause or announcement, is one of the most honest things a person can do for their own life. Ned.